When you see the headlines about the Middle East, it can feel like these conflicts just explode out of nowhere. But the fight between Israel and Hezbollah, that's a fire that's been smoldering for decades. To really get what's happening now, you have to go back and see how it all started. So let's dig in and figure out how a single border became one of the most volatile places on Earth.
But here's the thing, we're not going to start at the beginning. No, we're going to jump ahead, drop right into the middle of the chaos, just to see what all this history has been building up to.
Okay, picture this. It's February 2026. A huge regional war has just kicked off between an Israeli-US coalition on one side and Iran on the other. And you know how dominoes work? Well, one of the first to fall is Lebanon. The northern front with Israel just explodes. Iran's most loyal ally in the region, Hezbollah, gets the call, and a brand new, intense war is on. The whole region is just holding its breath.
So, you've got to ask, right? How did we get here? How on earth did this one little border become such a critical flashpoint in a massive war? To answer that, we need to hit rewind and go way back to find the seeds of this conflict, which were planted a long, long time ago.
You see, this story doesn't actually start with Hezbollah. It begins decades earlier, with the creation of Israel itself and a crisis that would change its northern neighbor, Lebanon, forever.
It's really just a chain reaction. It all kicks off in 1948. The first Arab-Israeli war ends, and it creates this huge refugee crisis. We're talking hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who flee their homes, and a ton of them end up in southern Lebanon, literally right on Israel's doorstep. Fast forward a couple of decades, and that refugee population becomes the perfect base of support for the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, who set up shop there.
And you can imagine, this completely turned Lebanon upside down. The country had this really delicate demographic balance, with a Christian majority. That all got thrown out of whack. The PLO starts using southern Lebanon as a launchpad for attacks into Israel, and that just ratchets up the tension. You end up with this massive split between Lebanese Christians and the PLO and their Lebanese Muslim allies. And the result? A totally devastating civil war.
So, with its neighbor basically on fire with a civil war and its own border under constant attack, Israel decides it has to step in. But this move, well, it would have an unintended consequence that would shape this conflict for the next 40 years.
Okay, so in 1982, Israel launches this huge invasion of Lebanon. And they've got a three-point plan, basically. First, wipe out the PLO and its bases. Second, get a friendly pro-Israel government set up in Beirut. And third, push back against Syria's influence in the country.
And you know what? On that number one objective, they absolutely succeeded. After this brutal siege of Beirut, Israeli forces kicked Yasser Arafat and the entire PLO leadership right out of Lebanon. On the face of it, it looked like mission accomplished.
But, and this is a huge but, while Israel got rid of one enemy, its occupation of southern Lebanon planted the seeds for something way, way more powerful. Right in the territory they were now controlling, a new resistance was starting to bubble up.
And that new foe? That was Hezbollah, which literally means the party of God. It was formed by radical Shiite Muslims in southern Lebanon for one specific reason, to fight the Israeli occupation. And they had a powerful friend. Just a few years earlier, Iran had its own Islamic revolution, and its new leaders were really eager to export their ideas. They saw Lebanon as the perfect spot, so they just started pouring in money, weapons, and training to this new group.
So with Hezbollah on the scene, the game totally changes. The conflict enters this whole new phase. We're talking a modern cycle of guerrilla warfare, retreats, and these just devastating, high-tech stalemates.
For almost 20 years, Hezbollah fought this relentless, grinding guerrilla war against Israeli troops. The casualties kept mounting, and the pressure back home in Israel became immense. So in the year 2000, Israel decided it just wasn't worth the cost anymore. They pulled out. For the Shiite world, this was incredible. It was a historic victory. A small militia had actually forced one of the region's most powerful armies to retreat.
And just look at how much things had changed by the time the 2006 war rolled around. This time, the trigger was Hezbollah kidnapping Israeli soldiers. And in the massive fight that followed, Hezbollah, unlike the PLO back in '82, took the full force of the Israeli military and stood their ground. They weren't kicked out, they survived. The key takeaway here is that in a little over 20 years, Israel was facing a much tougher, much more sophisticated enemy.
And you'd think a war like that would weaken them, right? Nope. After 2006, Hezbollah didn't just survive, it got stronger. Thanks to a ton of Iranian money, it rebuilt damaged neighborhoods, which made its social support rock solid. It became a powerhouse in Lebanese politics, even joining government coalitions,
And, most importantly, it massively grew its arsenal of rockets and got absolutely invaluable combat experience fighting in the Syrian civil war.
Okay, let's fast forward to today, or almost today. For years after 2006, that border was just simmering in what you could call a latent war. But then an attack hundreds of miles away would set the northern front on fire all over again.
October 7th, 2023. The Hamas attack on Israel. That day just changed the entire equation in the region. As Israel launched its huge operation in Gaza, Hezbollah decided it needed to help its ally. So what did they do? They opened a second front from the north, firing rockets and drones, forcing Israel to fight a war on two fronts at once.
Once the main fight in Gaza started to wind down, Israel turned its full attention to the north, and what happened in 2024 was intense. It was a swift and really devastating campaign against Hezbollah's leadership. It started with the assassination of a top commander, then this wild intelligence op that blew up their pager network, and it all culminated in the killing of their longtime leader Hassan Nasrallah. That intense pressure led to a ceasefire by late November.
So this ceasefire agreement, on paper, was meant to create some breathing room, a buffer zone. It called for everyone to stop fighting, for Israeli troops to pull out, and for Hezbollah to move its fighters away from the border, with the official Lebanese army moving in to keep things stable. That was the hope anyway.
But you know how these things go. In reality, it was anything but stable. The whole vibe of 2025 was perfectly captured by one source, which called it a latent war. A time of, relative calm, but with constant little attacks and violations, and this feeling that both sides were just quietly reloading, getting ready for the next round.
And that brings us right back to where we started, full circle back to February 2026. That latent war is officially over, the truce is in pieces, and the northern front is, once again, the center of a massive regional war. Every single thing we've talked about, the refugees from 48, the civil war, the invasion, the birth of Hezbollah, it all led, step by step, right to this moment.
So it leaves us with this one big, lingering question. When you look at this decades-long cycle of violence, where every truce just seems like a chance to prepare for the next battle, can there ever really be a lasting peace? Or is this all just a pause in a war that never truly ends?